Trump didn't tweet, he didn't hold a press conference. He handed Pam Bondi a classified folder behind closed doors, and what she uncovered had shit scrambling before the sun even came up. It was just past midnight, the kind of hour when most people are asleep, when even the headlines have gone quiet. But in Palm Beach, the lights at Mar-a-Lago were still on. Pam Bondi pulled up without an escort, no aid, no security. No one else was supposed to. No, she parked off to the side, out of view of the cameras. Stationed near the front gate, she didn't text, she didn't call ahead. The message had been clear: come alone. Inside, the air was too still for comfort. The entrance hall smelled faintly of fresh polished chandeliers. Overhead, through hard shadows on the marble, two men waited quietly near the end of the hallway, but said nothing. They just pointed left toward a door. That LED underground. Bondi followed her heels, echoing just once before she took them off, and carried them in hand. The room she walked into didn't match the grandeur upstairs. No gold leaf, no fresh-cut flowers, just a long wooden table, and three people already seated. Kash Patel, a former top Pentagon aide, Tom Ellison, a quiet legal mind who'd worked on FISA reform in private circles, and Lena Drummond, a former intel officer turned quiet whistleblower. All eyes turned to her, but no one smiled. Trump walked in last, no announcement, no handshake. He didn't sit. Instead, he carried a large black briefcase and set it on the table. It's all in here. He said no more summaries, no more filters. He flipped the case open and pulled out two folders. The first was thick, over 1.5 inches of unredacted memos, emails, handwritten notes, and meeting logs from inside the FBI, the CIA, and other three-letter agencies. The second was slimmer, but heavier in implication, a draft executive order that, if enacted, would require citizenship proof for all federal elections and strip states of federal election funding. If they didn't comply, they lied. He said, his voice lower now. They lied about everything. Crossfire Hurricane was never real. The dossier garbage. And Schiff knew. He paused, looking straight at Bondi. They thought it would stay buried. I want the lid off. Bondi opened the first folder, flipping slowly through each page. The dates of it matched what she feared: October 2016, November 2017, even as late as 2019. There were internal communications confirming that the Steele dossier hadn't been verified. Some emails even warned specific agents not to raise red flags because leadership prefers narrative continuity. I want this to be handled to the law, Trump said. No speeches, no social media theatrics, just firepower. Where it counts, you. Kash leaned forward. Will be accused of politicizing intelligence. Trump didn't blink. We've already been accused of everything, so let's at least tell the truth. Lena spoke for the first time, her voice level. If this gets out, it'll make Rashaya Gate look like kindergarten politics. These memos suggest coordination. This wasn't incompetence. It was theater. Bondi looked up. You want to go public with this? No. Trump said, I want you to go legal. You'll build the case quietly, meticulously. And when the moment's right, we go straight to Congress, not the media, not the press. The floor. She didn't answer. Right away, she flipped again through the memos, one in particular. Caught her eye an internal FBI note dated October 28th. 2016, stating that none of the dossier's sources have been confirmed, but that the Schiff team believes time is more critical than accuracy. She set the paper down. I'll do it. But once this starts, there's no halfway, you know. That right? Trump nodded once. That's why it's you outside. The wind picked up inside. No one spoke for a full 30 seconds. Then Bondi reached for her, heels stood, and looked each person in the eye. Let's give them something they can't spin. But what Trump didn't know yet, this wasn't just legal strategy. It was a match hovering over gasoline. The next morning, Bondi didn't return her D.C. condo. She booked a quiet room at a small and off the highway in Jupiter, Florida. No press, no calls, not even her regular security detail. She needed silence and time. The folders were spread out across the bed. She sat cross-legged on the edge, her laptop unopened beside her. This wasn't about email chains or timelines anymore. This was about intent patterns, language, the things people write when they think no one will ever read them. The first document was dated mid-2016, a memo between two FBI supervisors flagging the Steele dossier as unverified and derived from political opposition. It was followed by another, an internal email confirming that Christopher Steele was paid through a third-party contractor, Fusion GPS, with direct ties to the Clinton campaign. Bondi marked it. She kept a running tally, dates, names, signatures she was building. A trail, then came the audio. It was buried halfway through a batch of digital records on a thumb drive. Kash had slipped into the folder. She clicked play, static crackled, then a voice, calm, rehearsed, unmistakable. Adam Schiff. We don't need full verification. What we need is speed to FISA Has to be ready by Monday. Bondi sat back. She replayed it, then again there was no denial in the voice, no hesitation. He wasn't confused, he was directing at she. Opened a yellow pad and started writing a new column. Statements that contradict public testimony. Schiff had spent 4 years telling the public there was clear evidence of collusion. He'd stood in front of cameras on Capitol Hill making declarations of certainty. And now here, he was caught green-lighting a request for surveillance based on information no one had verified. Kash Patel had warned her they'll call you reckless for even holding these files. He said even though it's their names on the paper, she clicked over to Fusion GPS chain dozens of messages, exchanged with senior campaign staff. One line stood out timestamped just weeks before the election. We're pushing material through a friendly intel channel. Now should land by Friday. Bondi read it twice. Friendly intel channel. Not news outlet, not Time Opinion. Column intelligence. They had turned political. Dirt into surveillance fuel. It was worse than she thought. The deeper she went, less the files read like bureaucratic confusion. And the more they read like a roadmap, deliberate, coordinated, rehearsed. At the bottom of the pile sat one final folder labeled Operations Back Channel. Inside a single transcript, an intercepted message from a Fusion GPS contractor to a Clinton campaign aide. Need this to hit before Sunday. Schiff says he'll cover the press part. Bondi closed the folder. She wasn't angry. Not yet. She was calculating there was something more dangerous than rage growing behind her eyes. Resolved, she picked up the phone and called Kash. Tell Trump I've gone through everything. Kash didn't ask what she found. He just said how bad enough that I won't be able to walk into a federal building again without cameras in my face. You sure you want to keep going? There's no halfway. She replied. He exhaled on the other end. Then I'll prep our team. But just so you know, once you open this, they'll come for your license, your reputation. Maybe worse. Bondi looked back at the folder labeled Back Channel. I'm not doing this in my name. She said, I'm doing it. So this never happens again. Kash paused and said something she hadn't heard from him before. Good. Because you just became the story. Bondi didn't flinch. She began drafting notes for a legal briefing. These weren't blog posts. They weren't op-eds. They were charges, implications, constitutional challenges, each line with evidence. She was writing history with a pen that could get her disbarred. If she made one wrong move, she looked up at the TV in the corner. On mute, a CNN anchor was praising Schiff's unwavering integrity. She let out a dry laugh and turned the screen off. But the truth alone wasn't enough. Someone had to carry it through fire. 3 days later, the executive order hit the floor. No press release, no rally. Just a cold upload on the White House website at 8:12 a.m. followed by a simple tweet from the official account. From this point forward, federal elections must include proof of citizenship. States in violation will lose access to federal election funding by noon. The world was on fire. CNN ran a 5-hour segment calling the order of fascist authoritarian overreach. MSNBC had 3 former DOJ officials debating whether Bondi should be disbarred, and Sacramento, California's attorney general announced a lawsuit before he'd even finished reading the order. Bondi sat alone in a war room in D.C., surrounded by files, legal pads, and a stack of subpoenas ready to be filed. She watched the headlines. Without reacting, she knew this part would come. What she hadn't expected was how fast the machine would turn. The media stopped calling her a former attorney general. Now she was a Trump loyalist with a vendetta. Academic panels were already discussing the erosion of democratic norms. Some even questioned whether Bundy's access to classified material violated national security guidelines. None of them mentioned that the documents she cited were legally declassified. None of them touched the content. That afternoon, Schiff called a press conference. Cameras rolled. Before he reached the podium, his expression was measured. His voice dipped just enough to sound somber. This isn't transparency, he said, and it's a direct attack on our democratic institutions. President Trump is weaponizing declassified material to sow distrust, promote conspiracy theories, and dismantle our election systems from within. He paused dramatically, and Pam Bondi sadly has decided to play the role of enabler in the crowd. A reporter asked, Congressman, are you denying the authenticity of the memos she cited? I'm saying context matters, Chief. Replied, you can make anything look suspicious when it's cherry-picked. Bondi didn't respond with a press release. She didn't hold a microphone. She called Natalie Winters. Natalie wasn't a politician. She wasn't even a lawyer. She was a data-driven journalist who'd been quietly publishing investigations that mainstream outlets refused to touch. She didn't care about applause. She cared about receipts. You sure you want to be in this? Bundy asked her. I've been in it for years. Natalie replied, this just makes it official. That night, While the media recycled talking points, Natalie published a quiet thread on X, no hashtags, no filters, just screenshots of internal Fusion GPS communications, one after another, each linked to timestamps, names, and a digital paper trail. Within hours it was viewed over 10 million times, but the backlash came just as fast the next morning. An edited video clip circulated. It made it appear like Natalie had called for violence. She hadn't, but the cut was convincing. Within the hour, major networks were running. Her face was everywhere. So were the threats, text messages, emails, comments. Under her old college articles, traitor fascist. We know where you live, Bondi. Called her immediately. They're trying to discredit you before you get to the witness table. I figured. Natalie said calmly, but that just means they're scared they are, Bondi replied. Which means you did your job. Natalie paused. What now be DD. Said, you're not just a journalist, you're a witness. I'm bringing you in. The next morning, Bondi walked straight into her office and told her legal team to prepare Natalie for committee testimony. They didn't blink. By evening, protesters were gathering outside the building, chants, signs, cameras inside. Bondi reviewed the files one more time. Every page now felt radioactive, every word an accusation. But it wasn't fear that kept her moving. It was responsibility. She didn't start this, but she'd be damned if she let someone else rewrite it. She sent Natalie a short text. Get ready, they'll throw everything at us. Just hold the line, Natalie replied. They've already tried. I'm still here, but they're outraged. Didn't scare Bondi. It confirmed one thing. She hit the target. The hearing wasn't for another week, but it felt like the storm had already landed. Natalie Winters stepped off the train at Union Station, wearing black jeans, a canvas coat, and a worn leather backpack. No entourage, no makeup team, just 3 phones, a binder, and a growing file of redacted silence that had followed her since college. The car that picked her up wasn't government issued. It was Bondi's own driver, low profile, tinted windows. Natalie rode in silence, staring out the window. As the Capitol dome came into view, she wasn't intimidated. She was calculating at Bondi's temporary office in Georgetown cash. Patel met her at the door. He offered coffee, but she waved it off. I didn't come for the catering, she said, unzipping her bag. I came to drop a hammer. Bondi greeted her in the hallway. No handshakes, just a nod of shared understanding. You know they're going to come after you even harder. Once you're in that chair, Bondi said, I hope. They do, Natalie answered. I want them loud. The louder they get, the more people listen. They spent the day prepping. Bondi reviewed her testimony, while Natalie rehearsed answers to likely questions. Schiff's tactics were always the same: confuse, interrupt, twist. Bondi warned her of that. Natalie didn't care. I spent 6 years with facts, she said. He spent 6 years hiding from them. That night, Bondi turned on the news. Sure enough, a panel of legal experts was already calling for Natalie's testimony to be blocked. One anchor read, an anonymous source claiming Natalie wasn't credible due to ideological bias. Meanwhile, Bondi's inbox overflowed with veiled threats. Lawyers from 3 states warned she could face disbarment. One message from a Harvard law professor said she was flirting with criminality. Bondi didn't reply. She just printed them out and added them to a folder labeled attempts to silence. The following evening, Natalie appeared on a national broadcast. It was supposed to be a balanced discussion, but Bondi knew what it was: a televised ambush. 3 panelists, 1 moderator, all of them ready to paint her as dangerous. The host smiled thinly. Natalie, let's begin with the obvious. Why are Trump-aligned figures choosing to air classified grievances on national television? Natalie didn't flinch. She leaned forward, voice, even when the truth looks this bad, I get why you want to call it dangerous. The panel shifted in their seats. You're quoting documents that weren't meant for the public. One of them snapped. You mean the ones showing Fusion GPS coordinated with presidential campaign to feed unverifiable claims into intelligence channels? She shot back. Another panelist jumped in. This is classic deflection. You mean like signing off on FISA warrants using information the FBI had already discredited? She asked. Even the host looked thrown. But the moment that broke through, a subtle one panelist tried to imply she was endangering national security. She didn't yell. She didn't insult. She just said, trust isn't given as earned if exposing a lie ruins your institution. Maybe the lie was the problem. The room went quiet, but the network didn't let it last. The next morning, edit clips of the interview started circulating online. One cut her mid-sentence to make it sound like she was endorsing illegal surveillance. Another removed context to suggest she was encouraging political violence. She wasn't shocked. She was ready. Bondi called that afternoon. They're going full smear. Then we're right on a schedule. Natalie replied, you scared? I'm bored. Bondi laughed for the first time in a week. You're a lunatic. No, Natalie said, I am a flashlight. And they're all cockroaches. Bondi stared out the window for a second, watching the rain slide down the glass. I want you sitting right next to me when we go in. She said, not behind, not after, beside me. Then get ready, Natalie answered. because I'm not coming with a folder, I'm coming with receipts. But instead of backing down, Natalie answered a block number and said yes by the time Bondi and Winters walked. Into the hearing room, the seats were already full. The press had lined up before sunrise. C-SPAN's feed crashed twice before 9 a.m. Reporters whispered into their phones, as if they were waiting for a verdict, not testimony. Inside, the setup looked official, polished oak flags behind every chair, rows of water bottles lined up like props. But Bondi knew better. This wasn't about procedure. It was theater. Schiff had built it to humiliate her. What he didn't realize was that she didn't come to argue. She came to expose. She took her seat. Without glancing around, Natalie sat to her left, flipping through her notes, silent. But focus, her presence alone had already stirred tension. The room felt like it was holding its breath. The chairman, a man who had once called Bondi a relic of partisan politics, tapped his gavel. This committee, his call to order. Adam Schiff was the first to speak. His tone was controlled, his words sharpened to cut without showing the blade. Let the record reflect that this hearing is not a stage for conspiracy theories. Ms. Bundy's selective leaks and public commentary threaten national security and the integrity of this institution. He turned slowly toward her, eyes narrowed. This is Congress, not Florida courtroom theater. We will not be bullied by MAGA lawyers turned media stunt doubles. There it was. Bondi didn't blink. She didn't move. Schiff continued louder now. The so-called crossfire documents are cherry picked out of context and at best misleading, at worst doctored, and the notion that the FBI conspired against a candidate. It's not just false, it's dangerous. Then he leaned back like a man waiting for applause. None came. The chairman nodded toward Bondi. You may respond. She leaned forward slowly, her voice quiet, controlled. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's start with the congressman's concern about context. She clicked a button. A screen lit up behind her, displaying an internal FBI memo from October 2016. Top line, Steele dossier remains unverified. She looked directly at Schiff. Let the record reflect that the foundational document used to obtain surveillance on U.S. citizen Carter Page was never verified, according to your own agency. Click next slide. An audio file began to play, scratchy but clear. A timestamp, an FBI supervisor's voice. Yeah, the dossier is still junk, but they're pushing it through Schiff's office. Just get the Warren-approved gasps. Real one. Staffer drop with a pen. Someone in the back whispered something that sounded like a prayer. Schiff leaned forward. Mr. Chairman, I object. That recording is taken out of context. Bondi clicked again. A second voice. We've told Chef's staff this stuff hasn't been verified. We don't need it to be true. The voice replied, we need it to be useful. Silence. You could almost hear people thinking, please tell me that was fake. Bondi turned slowly to Schiff. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. You're not being cherry-picked, Congressman. You're being quoted. The chairman tried to interject, but no one moved. He gestured to play the full audio. It rolled uncut, uninterrupted, undeniable. Staffers from Schiff's office caught brushing aside legal warnings and admitting coordination with external actors. By the time it ended, Schiff wasn't speaking. His hands gripped the table like he might fall if he let go. Across the table, Christopher Steele cleared his throat. His accent betrayed a flicker of defensiveness. The dossier I compiled, he said, was raw intelligence. It was not meant to be treated as fact, merely a directional framework. Natalie turned her head slowly. You mean fan fiction funded by a political campaign, funneled into federal surveillance under the illusion of legitimacy? He opened his mouth, but said nothing. Bondi stood up slightly, clicking to the next slide. A Fusion GPS email subject line. We need something that can take him out before October. Body Steele's working on it. Steele shrank in his chair. Schiff sat silent, staring forward, like the room no longer existed. Bondi's voice sharpened. You don't have to believe me. Just listen to your own files, your own staff, your own voices. But just when it seemed like the damage was done, Bondi stood and raised one final piece of evidence. Bondi paused, letting the silence do its job. The screens behind her now displayed a still frame from a video, blurry, shaky, filmed with phone, the kind of footage you see in local news segments that people rarely pay attention to until the context changes everything. She clicked play. A community fair in Southern California, a small voter registration booth. Under a blue canopy, balloon swaying, a handwritten sign. No ID needed, register. Here the camera focused on the volunteer at the booth. Cheerful, casual, unbothered. A voice asked off camera. You don't need proof of citizenship. The volunteer smiled. Nope. If you live nearby, that's all we ask. A video cut. Gasp whispered through the hearing room like wind under a closed door. A few aides shifted in their seats. One congressman muttered under his breath. Bondi faced a committee, calm, unshaken. That wasn't a fringe group. That was a taxpayer-funded outreach program operating with state support, using public money, encouraging illegal voter enrollment. She didn't wait for someone to object. She moved straight to the next document, an internal email between a California election official and a campaign advisor. Make sure the new arrivals are signed up before end of month we need. Those numbers to carry Q for a hand slammed down on the table across the aisle. Congressman Larry Menzer, a known ally of Schiff, practically yelled, "That's completely out of context." Bondi turned toward him like a surgeon correcting a failed diagnosis. "You want context? Fine. Here's more." She held up another email, this one from a state director of strategy to their internal team. It read, "We can't count on Gen Z to unpredictable security. Immigrant count SP." Now that air in the room felt different, not loud, not chaotic, just still. The American people didn't lose faith in the system. She continued, "You swapped the system out behind their backs, then blamed them for noticing." At least 4 Democrats stood up and left no explanation, just the sound of expensive shoes scraping on marble as chairs pushed back and doors opened. Bondi kept going. "You open the borders and you open the ballot box. And now anyone who questions it, you call them fascists." She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The silence did the heavy lifting. This isn't about voter access. It's about voter laundering. This isn't compassion. It's coordination. She dropped the final slide, a memo titled Ballot Strategy Urban Influx, highlighted in yellow strategic demographic assets. You could hear phones buzzing in people's pockets, journalists typing under the table. Someone in the gallery whispered, "Oh my God." Bondi walked back to the table and sat down. Then Natalie stood. She wasn't supposed to speak again, but the room didn't stop her. "I spent years hearing that what I did was dangerous." She said that showing people the truth would tear institutions apart. But the only thing holding those institutions together is a lie that maybe they deserve to break. She turned toward Schiff, whose face now looked pale, drawn. He didn't respond. He didn't even look up. The chairman leaned forward, clearing his throat. He read from a sheet slowly, as if the words weighed more than paper. "Should, based on testimony and material evidence presented before this committee, Congressman Adam Schiff is referred to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation, specifically regarding false statements to federal investigators in abuse of congressional authority." No gasps this time, just the sound of legal exposure settling into the walls like smoke. The chairman continued. "Christopher Steele is found to have willfully misrepresented unverified claims as actionable intelligence and is hereby declared persona non grata. A federal request for expulsion has been initiated. Still remains, still eyes unfocused, and the third blow in light of payment records, internal emails, and coordination uncovered during this investigation. Hillary Clinton is ordered to comply with federal inquiry into campaign-related fraud. Fusion GPS accounts are to be frozen pending review." Someone in the gallery dropped their phone. The thud echoed across the room, and it wasn't just individuals. The chairman wasn't done. "Furthermore, federal funding is to be withheld from any state found to have violated constitutional election procedures." This includes, but is not limited to, California, New Jersey, and Illinois. Outside, a crowd watching the hearing on giant screens began to cheer, not wildly, not like a rally, but like people finally hearing something they'd waited years to hear, like breath finally released. Inside, Bondi said nothing, neither did Natalie. They didn't need. But this wasn't a victory speech. It was an autopsy and a warning. That night, the streets outside the Capitol weren't chaotic. They weren't loud. They were focused. Small clusters of people stood in the cold, watching replays on their phones, some with tears in their eyes. Some didn't speak at all, but most had the same look, like something they carried for years had just been confirmed. Bondi stood behind the curtain, looking out at the crowd through a narrow slit. It wasn't about Trump. It wasn't even about her. It was about the weight of finally hearing someone say it out loud. "You were lied to." She turned and walked toward the stage, past a few reporters still tapping on their keyboards, past her legal team now running on cold coffee and adrenaline. Trump had already spoken, and in a rare move, he kept it short. No slogans, no sarcasm. Just as they didn't come here to win power. They came here to take truth off life support. And now it was Bondi's turn. She stepped up to the podium, no folder in hand, no stack of papers, just her voice in a room full of people who were finally listening. "I've been offered a lot these past few days." She began. "Cabinet seats, committees, appointments." She paused, not for effect, but to let the moment settle. "But I'm not here to manage power. I'm here to teach people how to resist it." The crowd didn't roar. They stood still, some with hands over their hearts. Others just lowered their heads. "We were told to believe in institutions." She said, "We were told to trust the process." "But what do you do when the process is rigged before you ever show up?" She didn't look angry. She looked tired. "But sure, you don't fix that with new policies. You fix that by raising better citizens, by demanding truth like it's oxygen." Because it, as she stepped back, the applause wasn't explosive. It was real, measured, earned. Then Natalie took the stage. No teleprompter, no speech. "If journalism is supposed to speak truth to power," she said, "then what happens when power controls every word you print?" She looked out across the crowd. "They told me to shut up. They call me dangerous. They try to ruin my name. But I don't care what they call me anymore. I care what you believe. I care what your kids grow up thinking is normal." A pause. And if telling the truth makes me dangerous, then good, she lifted her binder high enough for the cameras to see this is why I'm launching Truthwire Media, no corporate sponsors, no editorial boards, no censorship, just facts and people. Who know what to do with them? Bondi returned to Mike one last time. I'm launching Liberty PAC. Not to elect more politicians. We've seen what most of them become. This is for citizens, for school board fights, for courtroom battles and nights when the system wants you quiet. And you just can't be. The sun was setting behind the stage. Someone handed Natalie an American flag. She didn't wave it. She just held it. Bondi looked over crowd one. Last time, this wasn't a comeback. This was a revenge. This was a course correction. And it's not over then. Her voice softened. I don't want your donation. I want your attention. I want your courage, because the next fight won't be in a courtroom. It will be in every neighborhood, every school, every vote, and every conversation you're too afraid to have. She stepped back, the screen behind them faded to black. Then one line appeared: when truth becomes rebellion, telling it is the beginning of revolution. The crowd didn't move. They stood quietly like something sacred had just happened. And maybe it had if you believe truth is worth defending, even when it's uncomfortable. Subscribe now, because the next chapter isn't up to them, it's up to you. Thanks for watching.